Hello, welcome back. So what we're going to do now is go through a very quick tutorial on how to use the SQL language to create, read, update, and delete data within tables in the database. What we're going to do today is just go through some very sort of basic operations in how to essentially create tables and data within tables, read the information and do some querying on it, update that information, and finally delete it. So this forms the kind of the sort of basic foundation of work that you would do within any database is to use this CRUD system. So let's just kind of start with the main concept here of CRUD. So it stands for obviously create, read, update, delete. We're going to take a look at that within the SQL language rather than use a tool itself, which was what we did the last time. We used PhpMyAdmin to actually simply create the information by using list boxes and text boxes and filling in drop-down lists, etc. And we're not going to do that this time. This is moving on to the next level up where we'll write the code ourselves. We can still use the PhpMyAdmin SQL tab to complete that. We'll take a look at where the database files also exist. So what we're going to really do in this exercise is take a look at this structure. This is the structure for Lab 3. And if you read through Lab 3, you'll see that you're asked to create a basic students table. And at the end of it, you're asked to create a results table and essentially link them via the primary key of the students linked to the foreign key of the results table. Notice that the results table also has a foreign key. So that's how we create the database relationship. And what I'm going to do now, I guess, is go through that exercise all in one go. You can take a look at it yourself, but basically it is designed, Lab 3 is designed to get you to perform the SQL exercise doing the essential create, read, update, delete, CRUD scenario. So what I'm going to do is just go straight to the tool of Laragon, and we'll get going and open up everything that we need. So the Laragon app, just to kind of pay attention to a few things as you get to use these things more often. When you do start all, you can notice that it's the Apache server starting. Notice it's the version of the database is MySQL. So that particular language is MySQL. Code is what we're pretty much writing. That's the version of SQL we're going to be writing, the structured query language. So let's get going on this, and we can see the databases that you've got to build there. So the database asks you to build a very specific name database. I've already created that in the labs today, so I'm going to just call this something slightly different. I'll use the word MyLab1 to create that, okay? So before I go and create that, let's take a look. Like I just said there, the question we wanted to ask really is where are the database files? So where does PhpMyAdmin place those database files? Well, first of all, let's take a look at that. And then when we create a database, we'll look again to see if they're actually there. So the version we're using is Laragon, and that's where the files are going to be kept. So within this directory, C, Laragon, and then data and MySQL, you can see it's installed there. That's where the actual files for the database are going to be stored. Excuse me. So I've already created the lab 1, and I'm not going to go ahead and do that again, but you can see there's nothing called MyLab1. There's no MyLab1 database there, but that's the directory we want to look out for. C, Laragon, data, MySQL. So I'll go back to the tool here, and we'll start creating that right now. So MyLab1 create, and it says that it's successfully created. It's appearing here in the left-hand column. Let's take a look in the file explorer to see if it's there, and of course there it is right there, MyLab1. Now if we go into that, we'll see that there is just a basic database foundation. There's no tables at all that have been created. So that's our objective now, to create some tables. So there's a structure. It's probably different if you're using MAMP. If you're using MAMP, this will be in the applications directory. So go to applications, then you'll have to go to MAMP if you're using the Mac rather than Windows. So applications, MAMP, and DB is what this will be called rather than data. It'll be then MySQL. So it's subtly different, but more or less they're stored in a very particular directory, the database directory. Okay, so let's go back to the tool and start creating some tables. So we're not going to use the tool to create the tables like we did the last time for Lab 2. What we're going to do is we're going to create the tables through the code, and that's the SQL window tab in which we're going to do that. So I'll just get some information there to create that table. We can see that the table students is what we're trying to create. I'll increase the size of that. We can check the syntax. So the create table students, student ID is an integer, last name, first name, etc. These are all just varchar of 255. So that looks pretty much good to go. And I'll click on the go button to double check that that gets created, and that should create that table within our database for us. And there it goes. It returns an empty set, which means there's no records within it. And it's essentially created that structure for us. So we can see here inside MyLab 1, we have the students table created. So we can go ahead and click on that and check the structure tab, and we'll see there's the structure that we just talked about. So just for a minute, let's move over to the files again to double check that. We can see now, if we look in MyLab, in the database that's been saved in a particular location, we can see that the students table is there now where it wasn't before. So we'll go back to the table. What we've got to do now at this point is turn that into a primary key. If we want to create a student table that has a primary key, that's going to have to be modified in some way. Now, like we did this the last time, we used just the sort of relation view window. We clicked on the relation view and we started dropping down a few tables. We're not going to do that this time. We're going to go directly into the SQL code and do it there. So let me just copy the information I have to do that. And here's the query, the ones we prepared earlier. What we want to do is essentially alter the student table. So alter table students by basically adding a primary key. We'll turn student ID into the primary key. So let's choose go for that. And there it is. So we altered it successfully. We've got the green tick. Now that should be the primary key of this table. We're clicking the structure. There it is. You can see the gold key is indicated that we've got that as a primary key. So now let's move on to the next section that you'll be asked to do, which will be to insert some data into it. So what we'll do here is we'll just insert a few test records and have a look at them to see if they can be modified in any way. So the way we do that is we have to use this insert command. And that's basically just the second type of SQL command that I want to introduce you today. So this will insert information into the actual table students that we just created within the database MyLab1. So double checking on that again, the structure insert into lab1. Well, ours is not called lab1, ours is called MyLab1. So MyLab1 students, student ID, last name, first name, address, city, email. So just be careful of that. I'm calling it MyLab1. You may be calling it Lab1 when you're doing the actual worksheet yourself. So it's a good thing to know the difference and be conscious of the database name, not just the table names. You can often forget the database name when working with these type of tools, especially if you move over to something like WordPress and you only install the database once, and you can tend to forget about the name of it. So let's take a look there and see if that will work. The same picture here, student ID, last name, first name, address, city, email, the same picture as you have in the current slide. So student, last name, first name, address, city, email. Right. Check it works. Go. Right, so those two students have been input. That's Fred and Barney, who we can see here. So Barney at TU Dublin, Fred Flintstone at TU Dublin. Right, so let's take a look and try and insert a few more students there just to kind of keep things slightly different, to do some interesting queries with them. So let's take a look and put in to the same database table the values of student number 3 and a student number 4. We'll call student number 3 Wilma and give her an email address. We'll call student number 4 Betty and give her an email address there as well. Okay, so let's try and insert those, double check, and go. So those two students have been inserted. When we do a browse, we can see them again. We can see that we've basically got Wilma and Betty, student number 3 and student number 4 inserted also. So let's take a look at some of the type of queries that we're going to do again upon that, because we want to select everything from those students. But in this situation, you wouldn't generally always select absolutely everything every time from a query. You can just say select asterisks from students without any criteria against it, but that's just going to throw back absolutely everybody to you. And like I say, that could be thousands, that could be hundreds. It'll grow very easily, and it's a good idea to start learning how to do the queries first of all before you just start reading at a full list of everybody. And the good news is it's not that difficult, because we provided with a whole lot of tools and functions that we can use. In particular, this select clause. So we can add this where the student is, some criteria. So where the student is, for example, 2, 3, or 4, which is one of the questions you're asked to do. If the student has one of these IDs in 2, 3, or 4, that's only going to bring us back people who have 2, 3, or 4. All right. It's going to show us everything as it did prior to that. So let's take a look. We might do an update. An update is an interesting one. That brings us on to the update part of CRUD. So we can see here that we have Fred, who lives in Dinoville. Well, let's update him that he gets a job in Dublin and comes over to us in a new city. So how we would do that is we would say, well, update the students, set the city to be Dublin, where the student ID is 1, which is basically Fred's ID. So this, you can see it reads very nicely. It almost reads like a human language. It's very easy to understand. That update worked correctly, and we browse it. We can see that Fred is now in Dublin, so that his city is Dublin. We'll do a second update, or a second query, really. And I suppose one of the reasons that I changed this to be Fred in Dublin is because you're asked to do this query in your lab sheet. So select everything where the city is Dublin. And when we do that, we'll just get Fred. All right. So let's do another one. We'll update Barney's email, that he no longer has a TU Dublin email, that his email is going to be a Gmail email. So when you look at everybody's emails, they're all the same, but we'll change Barney's to be a Gmail account. So that would work very similar to what we just did with Fred. And we can see there, update the students, set the email. I'll spell that correctly. Set the email to barney@gmail.com, where student ID equals 2, which is obviously the Barney Rubble's email there. So that gets updated. Let's take a look at it again, and we can see that his email is no longer a TU Dublin email, it's a Gmail email. Now that's put in there for a reason, because we have to use this particular command where you were asked in the lab sheet to query all students who are using a Gmail account. So as we can see, most of them were using a TU Dublin account, but if we want to query everybody using a Gmail account, it's kind of got to take a different strategy to it. So we will select all students, but that's going to show everybody with every kind of email. But we'll now say the criteria is where the email is like, not equals gmail.com. It's where the email is like some wildcard followed by gmail.com. So this structure of like, which is a lot different than the equals to, comes in very handy to find all kinds of all kinds of values with words you're searching for, like looking for keywords in a sentence. So where the email is like some wildcard followed by gmail.com. Let's check that and see. And lo and behold, here it appears. So there is our friend Barney@gmail.com. Okay, so that works pretty nicely. Just to recap very quickly on that one, that like command is very important. You'll use that again and again. Okay, so finally we've got to create another table. There's the second part of that. We've done, the first few things there. We've done the create, the read, the update, and I want to just kind of take a look at the relationships now. So we can see the where clause comes in very handy when dealing with select queries. Let's just build the second table and set up a foreign key there to create a relationship between them, because that's the last section that you're asked to do. So the table that you're asked to create is called results. And this is the results, the examination results of all those students you just built there. So let's go back to the database again. So we won't bother making any more changes to the table of students, but we will go back to the database, MyLab1, and build a new table, and we'll call this table results. So record ID, int, student ID. This time it's decimal, and we call this not int, and don't just leave it as int because int is whole numbers. We've got to say, well, how large? It's going to have 10, possibly up to 10 digit number, and to one decimal place. So as you know, GPAs are things like 3.2 or 3.25. We'll even call that two places because 3.25 is a GPA to two decimal places. So that's the way we would write that. So 10, 2, up to 10 digits to two decimal places. Okay, that's decimal values. Run that. Go, and that gets created. We have that value now. Look at its structure of results. We can see its structure is just as before, needing a primary key. So we'll put those in very quickly. I'll put them in both like this since we are kind of conscious of time. So we'll go and I'll say, well, first of all, alter the table results to add a primary key as record ID. And then we'll alter the table results to add a foreign key, calling it the student ID. The student ID of the table results should reference the student ID of the table students. That's the structure that we are asked to give, and that's basically the structure that we're going to continue with. So that student ID in results is exactly the same structure as student ID in student. So let's run that now and take a quick look to make sure it works correctly. We'll do the two of them at once here, and there we go. Two SQL queries run at once. When we look at the structure, you can see the record ID is the primary key, student ID is the foreign key. So we'll insert something very quickly into that just to check that it works. So these will be a very different type of insert because we're inserting into the results table, which it's got a constraint on it. It's got a constraint upon it. So the only way we can insert things in there is to ensure that we've already got those students in there. So we have insert results, record ID, with student ID. Now we know that we've got student ID 1 and student ID 3 already in there, so that should work for us. Okay, it's giving me a little error. I'm glad that happened because I didn't call it MyLab1, I called it Lab1. I've already created Lab1 in class, so this particular video I'm making is causing a conflict if I keep calling that Lab1. So there it goes. The structure of results is in place. There's the IDs, and notice that if you do this, you can click on that ID to see exactly who it goes to. So if you try to put somebody in there who's not actually marked as a student, it won't work. It'll give you an error if you try to put an ID that's not listed already. Okay, so just checking in on the main structures that we've covered. So in this CRUD system, create, read, update, delete, we've done the create, we've done the alter, the insert, all the select queries, the select where in, select where like. We've set up the foreign key relationship and join the two tables. And just to delete the information, to start deleting things from a table is actually very straightforward. And we can just delete records one by one for demonstration purposes here. So we'll go and take a look back at this set of records that we have in there. They're all related. We can see the relationships between sort of record ID and students. Finally, then, so we're going to take a look at deleting somebody. So to delete one record, we'll just use a very basic command. We'll try to delete this record, and we'll delete this person number 2. So we'll delete from students, where student ID is number 2. So taking a look at the structure there, we're seeing that Barney was number 2. So when we delete that person, it'll say 1 row affected, and when looking back in it, we can see, poor old Barney's gone. He's been deleted from the structure. So that's essentially what's going on with the basic CRUD operations. You can see that there's pretty much everything you can do with the database can be done within the creating of tables and data, reading information via querying and the various select criteria that you could work with, updating information, whether that be updating the table itself in the form of primary keys, or updating records using the update statement. And finally, the delete statement to delete records. And ultimately, we can delete tables as well, but I just want to keep this very basic today on the simplest introduction to this concept of using SQL queries and statements within a database. Now, if you look through Moodle, you'll see that there is a file which will help you go through all this material again, and just click on that SQL summary as a reference document, which essentially shows you every possible example you're going to need in order to do these type of statements. So it's just a kind of a reproduction of what we did today in the lecture, covering this week the three-tier architecture. But what you're probably interested in order to do the labs, to find all those examples, are the basic queries that can be done. So you can just kind of take a look at that yourself. It covers everything you need, such as the in keyword and the different constraints and like. And it's just got an example of a query for each particular instance that you'll need. So inserting into the tables, creating the tables, just different examples than what I just did there. All the various select statements. So I guess my recommendation to you is to just kind of mark that, figure out that, make sure you know where that is. I've left it here under lecture recordings, and that'll come in very handy to sort of use as a reference document for the SQL queries as you progress through this course and get more confident in applying those particular aspects of the structured query language within a PHP document. So there you go. That's it for today. Best of luck with that.